Welcome back to Biomindscape. So, what is an in situ conservation? It protects the species in the natural habitat like national park, sanctuary, and preserving ecosystem and evolution. While ex situ conservation, it protects them outside their natural home like zoo, seed bank, botanical garden, and controlling the settling like for critical endangered species needed immediately for breeding. And both strategies are important for biodiversity. With in situ, it focuses on the whole environment, and ex situ on the individual organism or the population. So, what is an in situ conservation? The conservation of species within that natural environment that ensure the genetic diversity and ecosystem stability, and it focuses on the protecting the entire habitat, including all the interaction and evolutionary process. Now, some of the example of in situ conservations are national park, wildlife sanctuary, biosphere reserve, and sacred groves. What are the pros and cons of it? Pros are cost effective. It maintains the natural process and protect the large area, where the cons are they required large area and less effective if the habitat is severely degraded. Now, what is an ex situ conservation? It is also known as the offsite one. So, it is defined as protecting endangered species outside their natural habitat in artificial or managed environment. Can you name some ex situ conservation sites? They are zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, seed bank, gene bank, tissue culture labs, and cryopreservation. It focuses on saving individual species from extinction and often when number are critically lowered. What are the pros and cons of ex situ conservation? They are highly protection from the predator, poaching and control breeding, and it have research opportunity suitable for rapid declining species, and the cons are they are costly, separates organism from natural environment and require specialized management. So what is the key difference? In situ conservation is in natural place, example saving a forest, and ex situ conservation it conserve outside the natural place, example saving a tree seeds in a bank. So there are many reasons, some obvious and other are not so obvious. But the important points in this particular chapter of NCRT is that they are grouped into three categories. First is the narrow, then broadly, utilitarian, and ethical. So these are some of the important points. The narrow utilitarian, these arguments for the conservation biodiversity, and it is obvious. So, utilitarian conservation argues for protecting biodiversity because it directly and indirectly benefit the human. Like the narrow utilitarianism, it focuses on immediate economic goods like food, medicine, and timber, while the broad utilitarian, it emphasizes the essential ecosystem services like oxygen, pollination, climatic regulation, clean water that sustain all life, plus the potential future benefits and aesthetic spiritual value. Both viewed see the nature as invaluable for human well being, mainly in the timescale and directness of the benefit. With broad utilitarianism, acknowledgement irreplaceable large scale support system. Now, what is a narrow utilitarianism? Direct economic gains like focusing on the tangible resource like food, grain, and the fruits, firewood, fiber, construction material, and industrial product like resin and dye. Then medicinal products for 25% of the modern medicine they come from the plant, with many traditional remedies also derived from the nature. And bio prospecting, that is the conserving the biodiversity, ensure ongoing discovery of new resource for humanity. Now, what is a broad utilitarianism? Broad utilitarianism, it is an economic service which highlight the essential function like oxygen production, pollination, nutrition cycle, and climatic regulation. So oxygen production will like forest, the Amazon forest that produce a significant amount of oxygen. The pollinators like bee, birds, bat, they are the pollinator. They pollinate the crops to ensure the food supply. Then nutrition cycle, it is essential for the soil fertility. Then climate regulation that maintain the atmospheric balance. And aesthetic and spiritual value like beauty, recreation, cultural significance. It have some aesthetic values as well. Then further potential is unknown future benefits like new medicines are there, technologies that the biodiversity might offer. So the narrow, why can I get directly from the nature like food and medicine? That is a narrow utilitarian, whereas the broad utilitarian, what does the nature do for us? Even if we don't see the product like air, water, stability, beauty, that is a broad utilitarian. So the ethical argument for conserving the biodiversity, it relates to what we owe to million of plants, animal, and microbe species with whom we share this planet. The philosophically and spiritually, we need to realize that every species has an intrinsic value, even if it may not be of current or any economic value to us. We have a moral duty to care for their well being and pass on our biological legacy in a good order to future generations. So the ethical argument for biodiversity conservation, it's centered on the belief that all species have intrinsic value and a right to exist independently of human use, establishing a moral duty for human as steward to protect the earth's biological heritage for future generation. This involved recognizing our independence with nature, acting responsibly to preserve species and ecosystem and ensure a healthy planet for those who come after us, viewing conservation not just as practice but as a moral imperative. The key ethical principle is intrinsic value, that every species from a microbe to a large mammal, they possess inherent worth and a right to exist regardless of its economic and practical benefit to human. Then stewardship and responsibility, where the human have a moral obligation to care for other species and manage ecosystem responsibility, acting as a custodian rather than dominators of the nature. Intergenerational equality, we must preserve biodiversity to pass on a rich, functional, and beautiful planet to future generations, ensuring they inherit a healthy biological legacy and independency that recognize that all the life forms are interconnected and the damaging biodiversity harms the complex web of life we rely on. And non dominational is the ethical framework that suggests the human should not exercise absolute control or dominate over the nature, but rather live with ecological limits alongside other species. So, why does it matters? Because it moves conservation beyond purely economic justification like medicine or food to deep commitment to the life itself. So it addresses question of justice, fairness, and our place in the natural world, influencing policy and personal action. So it emphasizes the compassion and respect for vulnerable species impacted by human activity like habitat loss and pollution. So, how do we conserve biodiversity? When we conserve and protect the whole ecosystem, its biodiversity at all level is protected. We save the entire forest to save the tiger. This approach is called the in situ, that is the on-site conservation. However, when there are situations where an animal or plant is endangered or threatened, organisms face a very high risk of extinction in the wild in a near future and need urgent message to save it from the extinction like exsitu, that is offsite conservation, is the desirable approach. So in situ conservation faced with the conflict between development of and conservation, many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all their biological wealth. Invariability, the number of species waiting to be saved from extinction far exceed the conservation resource available. On a global basis, this problem has been addressed by eminent conservationists and they identify the maximum protection certain biodiversity hotspot region with very high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. What is endemism? The species conform to that the region and not found anywhere else. Means the species will be found at the particular region and it will be not be found any other place or anywhere else. So initially there are 25 biodiversity hotspot they were identified, but subsequently 9 more have been added to the list and now more have been added. So you can check it how many biodiversity hotspot are there in India and are all around the world. And you can also watch a short of biodiversity which I have made on my channel. You can like, share and subscribe my channel for best content, and all the chapter will be covered here. So let's moving on to the chapter where I was. The 25 biodiversity hotspot they were identified, but subsequently 9 more have been added to the list, bringing the total number of biodiversity hotspot in the world to 34. So these hotspots are also the region of accelerated habitat loss, and 3 of the hotspot, these are the important points here. We have to learn the names of the hotspot like Western Ghats, Sri Lanka, Indo-Burman and Himalayan. It cover a country exceptionally higher biodiversity region, although all the biodiversity hotspot put together cover less than 2% of the Earth's land area, and the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinction by almost 30%. Now what important line is here, that the 3 of these hotspots, which are they? Western Ghat, Sri Lanka, Indo-Burman and Himalaya. What does they cover? A country's exceptionally high biodiversity regions they cover, and all these biodiversity hotspot, if we put together, they cover 2% of the Earth's land area, and the number of species they collectively harbor, that is strictly protected. Of these hotspot, they can reduce what the mass extinction can they can reduce the mass extinction by 30%. So in India, ecologically unique and biodiversity rich region, they are legally protected as biosphere reserve, national park and sanctuary. So India has 14 biosphere reserve, 90 national park and 448 wildlife sanctuary. So India has an also history of religious and cultural tradition that emphasize the protection of nature. So in many culture, the traces of the forest were set aside, and all the trees and wildlife within were venerated and given total protection, like sacred groves, where they are found. The sacred groves they are found in Khasi and Jaintia hills in Meghalaya, Aravali hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghat region of Karnataka and Maharashtra, and Sarguja, Chanda and Bastar area of MP. So in Meghalaya, the sacred grove are the last refuge for large number of rare and threatened plant. Next is the exsitu conservation. In this approach, the threatened animal and plants are taken out from the natural habitat and placed in special setting. Like species, they remove from the wild and kept under the human care. Then zoological park, botanical garden and wildlife safari park, it serve their purpose. Example of the exsitu conservation are zoo, botanical garden and safari park. Many animals have become extinct in the world but continue to survive in zoological park. Species may disappear from nature but survive in captivity. Exsitu conservation has advanced beyond keeping species in enclosure, where the modern methods are more advanced. Gamete can be preserved using cryopreservative technique. Here sperm and egg frozen at a very low temperature and stored for a long period. Example, egg can be fertilized in vitro. Example, fertilization done outside the body like IVF. Then plant can be propagated using tissue culture. Like new plant grow from a small tissue. It helps multiply rare plant quickly. The seed of different genetic strain can be stored in seed bank. Example, genetic diversity preserved. Example, seed bank by Selbard. So, biodiversity knows no political boundaries and its conservation is collective responsibility of all nations. The species cross country borders and conservation require global cooperation. So, biodiversity conservation is achieved through in situ protection of natural habitat and exsitu preservation using zoos, seed bank, and modern biotechnological tools, with global cooperation being essential. The exit conservation. In this approach, the threatened animal and plants are taken out from the natural habitat and placed in a special setting where they can be protected and given special care. Zoological park, botanical garden, and wildlife safari parks serve this purpose. There are many animals that have been extinct in the wild but continue to be maintained in zoological park. In recent years, exit conservation has an advanced beyond keeping threatened species in enclosure. Now, gamete of the threatened species can be preserved in viable and fertile conditions for long period using cryopreservative technique. Egg can be fertilized in vivo, vitro, and plant can be propagated using tissue culture method. The seed of different genetic strain of commercially important plant can be kept for a long period in a seed bank, and biodiversity knows no political boundary and its conservation is therefore a collective responsibility for all nations. The historical convention of biological diversity, the Earth Summit, held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, called upon all nations to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefit. So, in a follow up, the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in 2002 in South Africa, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 significantly reduce in the current rate of biodiversity loss at a global, regional, and local level. So let's summarize the chapter. Since life originated on the earth nearly 3.8 billion years ago, there has been enormous diversification of life form on earth. So biodiversification refers to the sum total of diversity that exists at all level of biological organization. It has some particular importance in diversity at genetic, species, and ecosystem level, and conservation efforts they aim to protect the diversity at these three levels that are genetic, species, and ecosystem. Now, more than 1.5 million species has been recorded in the world, and there might be nearly 6 million species on the earth that are waiting to be discovered and named. So which is species they are the greater for 70% they are animal, whereas 70% they are insect. The group of fungi has more than species than that of the vertebrate, and in India 45,000 species of plant and twice as many as species of animal is one of the 12 mega diversity country of the world. Now here all the important points are mentioned in the summary box, so it is important to learn this one. The species diversity on the earth is not uniformly distributed but shows interesting patterns. It is generally highest in the tropics and decreased toward the pole. Important explanation for the species richness at the tropic has more evolutionary time, they provide a relative constant environment, they receive more solar energy with contribute to great productivity. Species richness is also a function of the area of region, and the species area relationship is generally a rectangular hyperbolic function. It is believed that communities with high diversity tend to be less variable, more productive, and more resistant to biological invasion. Earth fossil history reveals incident of mass extinction in the past, but the present rate of extinction largely attributed to human activities. They are 100 to 1000 times higher. 700 species have been extinct in recent time and more than 15,500 species of which greater than 650 are from India and currently facing the threat of extinction. The cause of high extinction rate at present include habitat, particularly the forest, loss and fragmentation, overexploitation, biological invasion and coextinction. So, the earth rich biodiversity is vital for the very survival of mankind, and the reason for the conservation biodiversity are narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical. Beside the direct benefit of food, fiber wood, and pharmaceutical etc., there are many indirect benefits we receive through the ecosystem. services such as the pollination, pest control, and climate moderation and flood control. We also have a moral responsibility to take good care of the earth, biodiversity, and pass it on in a good order to the next generation. So, the biodiversity conservation may be in situ as well as ex situ. So, we have discussed the in situ conservation. The endangered species are protected in their natural habitat so that the entire ecosystem is protected. Recently, 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world have been proposed for intensive conservation efforts. Of these, three Western Ghats, Sri Lanka, Himalaya and Indo-Burman covers the India's rich biodiversity region. Our country in situ conservation efforts are reflected in its 14 biosphere reserve, 90 national parks which are greater than 450 wildlife sanctuary and many sacred groves. Ex situ conservation method include protective maintenance of threatened species in zoological park, botanical gardens and in vitro fertilization, tissue culture, propagation and cryopreservative of the gamete. Thanks for watching. Do like, share and subscribe.